Hey drivers, Dr. Nuesse from EasyDOTphysicals.com, back again with another video. This one is going to be about specific medical test, diagnostic tests, and the numbers, the results associated with them that you are going to need to be aware of to be able to pass a DOT physical. So we're talking specifically to drivers that potentially have cardiovascular issues, diabetes, sleep apnea, and respiratory issues, lung issues. So if you've got any one of these issues, please watch this video and understand the tests that may be necessary and the results in order to pass the DOT physical. If you don't have one of these issues, this video probably is not for you. So, all right, let's first talk about cardiovascular conditions, because the FMCSA gives us very clear standards if somebody has had a heart problem of what tests are needed and what standards need to be met in order to, again, pass the DOT physical. So if you've had a heart condition, if you've had a heart problem, most likely you've had one of two different diagnostic tests, sometimes both, but the first will be an echocardiogram. So if you've had that, if you've had an echocardiogram, bring that in with you to the DOT physical so we can see the results, because the results are very important. And what we're looking for is an ejection fraction of 40% or greater. So that's if you've had an echo. The other alternative test, the very common test, is a stress test, sometimes called a treadmill test. So this will be where you're up walking on a treadmill. And what we're looking for with this test is 6 METs through stage 2. So 6 is the number you're going to want to look for on that test in order to pass the stress test or meet the FMCSA standard. So if you've had an echo and you're under 40, or if you've had a stress test and you're under 6, you're most likely not going to pass the cardiovascular portion of the DOT physical and therefore not be able to pass the DOT physical. All right, and number 2 is drivers who have diabetes. And I've done a couple of videos on diabetes specifically because I think that information is very, very important to drivers, because a lot of drivers come into our offices with diabetes. So the information it's very, very important if you want to, again, pass the DOT physical, maintain your job, your livelihood, all of those type of things that go along with, again, passing the DOT physical. So we're specifically talking about drivers who do not take insulin. If you take insulin, again, that's a completely different scenario. I've done a complete video on that. Look up that video. But potentially what could happen is if you have diabetes, you're taking a medication to control your diabetes, we may want to see your A1C levels. So I'm going to give you the levels that we are looking for based on the FMCSA standards. So if you have recent A1C numbers, just bring those in with you. We may want to look at them. It just saves you a trip from having to go get this information and delaying your DOT physical and getting your medical card. So if you have A1C numbers and you're under 6.5, you're most likely going to be able to get a 2-year medical card. If you're between 6.6 and 8.9, that is a little high. And the FMCSA, again, wants us to then cut your medical card all the way in half. So a 1-year medical card instead of a 2-year medical card. If you're above that, if you're 9 plus, we may only be able to give you a 3-month medical card, and that's a temporary card in order to go back to your doctor, get this situation under control, because 9 and above means your diabetes is not being controlled correctly, or based on the number and maybe other factors that we see during the DOT physical, if you are above, or if you're 9 or above, we may not be able to certify you at all. This may actually cause you to be disqualified. All right, and number 3, and this is a huge issue. This is an issue that affects multiple drivers we see in our office every day have this scenario. And again, I've done a complete video on this situation. This is sleep apnea, and we are going to be looking for a very specific piece of data. If you have sleep apnea, have been diagnosed as having sleep apnea, and are required to use some type of machine like a CPAP machine to treat your sleep apnea. So what we are looking for is a report. So every CPAP machine will generate a report. Typically it's on an app right on your phone. You can just click the report and find this information. But one line of that report is how many days in the previous 30 days you used the CPAP machine for at least 4 hours. That number has to be 70% or greater. And that'll be one line. You'll be able to read it right for yourself. It's how many days you've used it for 4 hours over the past 30 days. That has to be 70% of those past 30 days in order to pass. So 70% or greater, you will pass. Below that, again, we may be able to give you a temporary card to be able to get those numbers up, but certainly that is going to affect our ability to pass you for the DOT physical. So again, that should be in an app right on your phone. You can look that up and bring that information in with you, so it saves you some time, saves you some headache from us having to send you back out and say we can't certify you yet because we need this information. All right, and finally for today, and not as common in our offices, but we do see it from time to time, is respiratory issues. And again, the FMCSA gives us very clear tests and the numbers, the data that the tests need to be in order to pass if you've got a lung condition. So think of things like COPD or a long history of smoking, things like that. So if you've had one of these tests, you will just bring the data in with you, and sometimes based on the exam findings, we may send you for one of these tests. So the most common is called spirometry, and that's where you blow into a tube and they check your lung function. They check the capacity of your lungs. This needs to be, the FEV1 needs to be 65% or greater. FVC needs to be 60% or greater, and the FEV1 over FVC ratio needs to be 65% or greater. All right, so if you pass spirometry, if you meet that standard, typically no other tests are needed, and that's 95% of all clients that I've ever seen pass spirometry. But if you do not, if you don't meet this standard, we will do extra tests and additional tests to see if you meet that standard, and if you do, then we can still certify you, and that is called blood gas. And that standard is if we are at a location that is below 5,000 feet, you will need to meet 65 millimeters of mercury, and if we're above 5,000 feet, at an altitude above 5,000 feet, it'll be 60 milligrams of mercury. All right, and then finally, what we might look at to check your lungs is pulse oximetry, and this needs to be 92% or better. All right, those are the diagnostic tests along with the conditions that you may need to be aware of if going in to take your DOT physical. Until next time, drivers, stay safe.